My husband asked me to trust him one last time while standing barefoot in my dead mother's kitchen, and less than a minute later, another woman's message lit up his phone on the counter between us. It was such a small, ordinary morning that if I had tried to explain the wrongness too early, I would have sounded ungrateful. The coffee was weak because we were stretching the grounds again. There was painter's tape still clinging to the trim by the back door from where Colin had promised he'd finish the edging this weekend for 3 weekends in a row. A Kroger receipt curled beside the fruit bowl, and the old refrigerator made the same tired knocking noise it had made since I was 16. And my mother used to thump it once with the heel of her hand and say, "Everything in this house has a personality problem." That line came back to me all the time in that kitchen, more lately than I liked. Colin stood at the sink in work jeans and a grey thermal, rinsing out his coffee mug. The November light made the stripped patches on the far wall look colder than the rest of the room. We had taken down the old cabinets in August because he said opening up the back side would give us room for a breakfast nook or a home office or something that might finally make the place work for us. By November, the cabinets were still stacked in the garage, the wall studs were exposed, and the kitchen looked like a thought somebody had stopped halfway through. "Lena," he said, still not looking at me, "I need you to trust me one last time about this permit thing." There was nothing dramatic in his voice. That was part of what made it land wrong. Colin's calm had a way of making every question feel like a burden I was placing on him. He dried his hands, set the mug down, and turned toward me with that tired, patient expression that used to make me feel safe and lately made me feel 12 years old. "It's just a preliminary meeting," he said. "I already told you that. Denise at the county office is expecting the draft paperwork sometime next week. We're not committing to anything today. I'm trying to get us options." Us. I was standing by the stove in thick socks and one of his old college sweatshirts, scraping the last of the strawberry jam from the jar onto a piece of toast I didn't really want. Outside the window over the sink, the maple in the backyard was down to a few copper leaves, and the grass had that flat yellow look Ohio yards get right before winter gives up pretending to be pretty. I nodded because nodding had become one of the ways I kept the mornings moving. The truth was, money had been tight long enough that every conversation in the house seemed to drag a calculator behind it. Colin's hours at the print shop had been cut back in late summer. My clinic job was steady, but steady only goes so far when the furnace is older than your marriage and half your kitchen is sitting in the garage. We had been patching things, postponing things, talking around things. Trust me, one last time could have meant anything in a marriage like ours. It could have meant let me handle the call with the insurance guy. It could have meant don't panic over the tax estimate until I've looked at it. It could even in a kinder life have meant I know this is hard, but I'm still with you in it. That was the life I kept trying to locate us inside. "I'm not trying to make this harder," I said. "I know." He gave me a quick smile, the kind you give a child who has just admitted to being overtired. "That's why I need you not to spiral before there's an actual decision to make." The word spiral was one he had started using in the last year, never loud enough to start a fight, always soft enough to sound almost affectionate. I hated it every time. Not enough, apparently, to stop him. I looked down at my toast so he wouldn't see my face change. After my mother died, everybody in the family got very respectful around my feelings for about 6 months, and then they got relieved when I stopped showing them so much. I was 23 then. People praised me for being steady, for handling things well, for not turning the house into a shrine. My cousin Rachel said once, not unkindly, "You got so good at being low maintenance, people started thinking it cost you nothing." I thought about that more often now too. Colin's phone buzzed on the counter between the sugar bowl and a stack of paint sample cards we had never thrown away. He glanced toward the back door. "That's probably Ray." I told him I'd call him from outside if he got back to me. Ray was the contractor he'd been mentioning for 2 weeks without ever actually bringing over. Every time I asked whether we were really moving on anything, Colin gave me some version of not yet, not real, yet don't get worked up. He wiped his palms on his jeans, picked up his coat from the chair, then seemed to notice the phone buzzing again. "I'm just gonna step out for a second," he said. "Please, Lena, let me get through this before you decide it means more than it does." He kissed the side of my head as he passed me. It was a familiar gesture, light and efficient, like tapping a receipt into a drawer. Then he was out the back door. I stood there listening to the loose screen slap once behind him. The kitchen went quiet except for the refrigerator knocking and the soft whistle of the kettle I'd forgotten to turn off all the way. His phone buzzed again on the counter. I wish I could say I did not look at it right away. I did. Not because I was snooping. Because my name or something close to it was already sitting there in the preview like a hand on my shoulder. Mara, once she signs, the rest gets easier. For a second I just stared. Mara. I knew the name in the vague, unimportant way I knew names from Colin's half-finished explanations. A financing contact, maybe. Somebody who understood development stuff, somebody practical. I had pictured a woman in a blazer older than both of us, not a person who would text him like that before 9 in the morning. Once she signs. The kettle gave a little spit of steam. I turned it off without taking my eyes off the phone. There are moments when your body understands a thing before your mind lets itself shape the words. My chest went cold first. Then my fingers did. I picked up the phone. I knew his passcode, at least I still knew that. His thumbprint smudges were all over the screen. The message thread opened under my hands so easily it felt obscene. The newest messages were short. Mara. If she gets sentimental again, keep it about the tax pressure, Mara. Don't mention resale yet. Mara, once she signs, the rest gets easier. My mouth went dry so fast I had to swallow twice. There were older ones above that, not weeks of love notes, not hearts, not anything so easy and ugly. That might actually have hurt less. Colin, she's attached to the back kitchen wall for some reason. Mara, I noticed. Mara, once it's opened up, she'll see it, Mara. The layout makes more sense without all that dead space. Colin, she hears your mother's kitchen and stops thinking structurally. I read that line 3 times. The back kitchen wall. I turned slowly and looked at it. The narrow section near the old breakfast table, the one my mother had once painted pale yellow because she said morning light deserved help in an Ohio winter. The wall where she had marked my height in pencil until I was 14 and insisted I was finished. The marks were hidden now behind primer and patchwork and bare studs and all the ways time lies about what it removes. I scrolled higher with a thumb that had started shaking. Mara, did you ever ask about temporary access during the filing window, Colin? Not yet. Colin, need her calm first. Outside, I could hear Colin's voice low and even on the other side of the back door, too muffled to make out words. Need her calm first. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been because suddenly I felt ridiculous and watched though nobody was in the room. I stepped back from the counter. My heel caught the edge of one of the loose floorboards near the pantry and the tiny wobble under my foot almost made me cry. Not because I fully understood it yet, because I understood enough. When Colin came back in, I was rinsing my plate in the sink with water gone lukewarm. Ray can do Thursday, he said, if we want him to look at the load-bearing side before we decide anything. I kept my back to him. I thought nobody had seen it yet. There was the smallest pause. Then his voice still gentle. Seen what the back wall? He moved closer. I could feel it before I looked. Lena. I turned, then plate still in my hand. You said the meeting was preliminary. It is. His face did something careful, something that would have looked open to anybody who didn't know him the way I did. Mara walked through with me last week for 15 minutes because she understands permitting better than I do. That's all. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd get upset before there was anything concrete. I stared at him. He exhaled and reached for the dish towel. Not me. This is what I mean. You take one piece out of context and suddenly it's emotional. Out of context. My mother's kitchen. My signature. Need her calm first. He folded the towel once very straight. I'm trying to get us out of a hole, Lena. Us again. I nodded because that was what I had trained myself to do when the ground moved and there was nowhere graceful to put my anger. He seemed to take that nod as surrender. 10 minutes later, he was gone for work, calling back from the front hall. Don't dig through the permit stuff, okay? It'll only confuse you until I explain it. The house was quiet after he left. Too quiet. Even the refrigerator had stopped knocking. I stood in the kitchen another full minute, then crossed to the drawer beside the sink where Colin kept takeout menus, batteries, and every paper he said he'd organize later. The drawer stuck halfway, then jerked open with a dry wooden scrape. Under a Menards flyer and a folded gas bill was a county packet in a manila sleeve. I pulled it out and laid it on the counter. Property use review, proposed renovation footprint, access notes. Halfway down the 3rd page in blue ink that was not Colin's, a note had been written beside the kitchen sketch. Open sightline here once owner signs. And in the top right corner, small and neat, were 2 initials. MV. I stood there with the page in my hand until the letters stopped looking like initials and started looking like a person. The kitchen had gone so still that I could hear a truck breaking out on Maple Avenue and the little click in the old thermostat by the pantry. I looked back down at the note as if a second reading might make it less humiliating. Open sightline here once owner signs. Owner. Not Lena, not homeowner, not Mrs. Mercer, just owner, like I was a role in a transaction somebody was waiting to clear. I turned the page. Then the next one. The packet was thicker than I'd thought. There were floor plan sketches with measurements Colin had never shown me, a checklist for occupancy review, handwritten arrows pointing toward the back of the house, and a section clipped behind the county forms labeled Proposed Mixed-Use Consideration. That part I read twice before I fully understood it. A consultation room, limited client entry, parking adjustment request. He hadn't just been talking about opening the kitchen, he had been planning to carve my mother's house into something else. I sat down hard in one of the mismatched chairs we'd dragged in from the dining room after the cabinets came out. The chair gave a thin squeak under me. For a minute, all I could do was stare at the old knot in the pine tabletop where my mother used to set grocery circulars every Sunday morning, clipping coupons with kitchen scissors that barely cut by the time I was in high school. When I was 11, my mother painted that back wall yellow on a Saturday because she said the kitchen felt too narrow and gray after winter. I had stood on the counter in sock feet handing her the brush while she laughed every time I dripped paint on the drop cloth. She kept talking about light like it was something you could coax into a room if you loved it enough. Later, after she got sick, she used to sit at that same table with tea gone cold and make lists in blue ink. Bills, medications, things to ask the doctor, things Lena shouldn't have to worry about yet. After the funeral, when the lawyer handed me the folder and said the house was mine, I cried so hard I embarrassed myself. Not because of the money. There wasn't much money in it. The roof already needed work, the wiring was old. The upstairs bathroom sink had always run rusty for the first 10 seconds. But it was the only thing in my life that felt like it had been given to me on purpose. And now there were someone else's initials in the corner of its future. I should have been angry first. Instead, I felt stupid. That was the part I hated most. Colin had not had to force me into anything. He had only had to stay calm long enough for me to question my own alarm. I pulled out my phone and called Rachel before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring with her usual, "If this is another family recipe emergency, I'm not helping you, fake pie crust confidence." I almost laughed and then I didn't. Rach, the silence on her end changed shape immediately. What happened? I looked down at the papers spread out on my mother's table, my hand still resting over the note in blue ink as if I could cover it back up. I think Colin's been planning something with the house, with some woman named Mara. I found messages and county paperwork, and I can't tell if I'm losing my mind or if this is exactly what it looks like. Rachel was quiet for half a breath, then said, "Tell me what you found." Slowly. So I did. The message preview, the thread, the note in the margin, the proposed mixed-use section, the way Colin had said preliminary, like it meant harmless. By the time I finished, my throat hurt. Rachel did not fill the silence with comfort. That was one reason I loved her. She knew comfort too early could become another way to keep a woman sitting still. "Lena," she said at last, "when was the last time he told you the whole thing before he told somebody else?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. Outside, a dog started barking 2 yards over. Somewhere farther down the block, somebody was running a leaf blower even though most of the leaves were already gone. "I don't know," I said. "You do know." I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "He handles the practical stuff faster than I do." "That's not what I asked." I shut my eyes. There were little things, the insurance conversation in August that he simplified for me after the call was over, the furnace guy in September who apparently had already been and gone while I was at work because Colin didn't want me taking off for it, the way he would mention decisions in past tense like I had been standing there in spirit and that counted. I had kept telling myself that marriages did this under stress. One person carried a piece the other one couldn't. One person got brusque, one person got tired. Not every exclusion was betrayal. Not every bruise deserved a trial. But I thought of the messages again. Need her calm first. I think I said slowly, I got used to calling it help. Rachel let that sit there between us. "Okay, so now you stop doing that. I don't even know what all of this means." Then find out from somebody who doesn't sleep in your bed. I looked back at the county stamp on the front page. Permit office. Property use review. Denise something handwritten in a corner I hadn't noticed before. "You think I should go down there? I think you should stop letting him be the only narrator in this story." We stayed on the phone another few minutes while I gathered the pages back into order. Rachel asked me to text her pictures of everything. I did. My hands were steadier by then, which scared me in a different way. Shock had started hardening into something more useful. Before we hung up, Rachel said more gently, "Lena, yeah, if this is what it looks like, don't make yourself smaller just because you found out late." After I ended the call, I stood in the hallway by the coat closet staring at the framed photo from our wedding that still hung above the radiator. Colin had one hand at my waist. I was looking up at him like the future was something we had already agreed on. The picture had bothered me for months, and I had never really asked myself why. Now I saw it. He looked straight at the camera. I looked only at him. I drove to the county office on my lunch break in my clinic scrubs with a cardigan over them and my hair still clipped up from the morning. The building was one of those brown brick municipal boxes from the 70s, all low ceilings and fluorescent lighting and bulletin boards that still had last month's recycling notice pinned crooked. A woman at the front directed me upstairs to permits. I almost turned around twice. That was the humiliating truth of it. Even with the papers in my tote bag and Mara's message burned into my head, part of me still wanted someone to explain it in a way that let me go home and stay married. The permits counter was half glass, half beige laminate with a little dish of free pens chained to a stand. Behind it sat a woman in reading glasses looking over a stack of forms. Her hair was pinned up in a clip the color of tortoise shell, and she had the kind of practical face that made me trust her immediately. "Can I help you?" she asked. I slid the packet onto the counter. "I think I need to understand where this is in the process." She adjusted her glasses and pulled the papers toward her. "Property address," I gave it to her. She typed for a moment, the keys clacking lightly. Then she nodded. "Okay, Mercer property. Right." Something in my chest tightened. She kept reading. "Looks like this was an inquiry packet for the rear renovation and possible limited office use review. We haven't finalized anything. Still needed signed owner consent before formal filing." Owner consent. Again, I swallowed. "Has anyone been discussing it already?" She glanced up at me with mild surprise. "Well, yes. Your husband was in a couple weeks back. And the woman with him, Mara, called after that about setback questions." She looked back to the screen. "I thought you all were deciding between filing now or after the first of the year." For one embarrassing second I could not speak. She must have seen something change in my face because her voice softened. "Are you Mrs. Mercer?" "I'm Lena Mercer." "Oh." She paused. "I'm Denise Hanley." I nodded like that mattered, like names were still the kind of thing I could hold. Denise looked from me to the papers, then back again. "I'm sorry. I assumed you knew where things stood. He said he was waiting on your signature, but the way he talked I thought the design side had basically been settled." The design side. Settled. I stared at the blue handwriting on the page under her hand, at the neat arrows and margin notes at my mother's kitchen flattened into measurements and options. "Did he say what the office use was for?" I asked, and hated how thin my voice sounded. Denise clicked once more on her screen. "Consultation workspace, limited client appointments, nothing high traffic." Looked like they were trying to preserve residential status while opening the back rooms. "They." I heard the word inside the sentence even though she didn't say it. My ears were ringing now, a soft, steady rush like water inside pipes. Colin had told me he was looking at possibilities. He had told me Mara understood permitting. He had told me nothing had been decided. But people only used language like settled and waiting on your signature when they already believed the hard part was over. I was the hard part. Denise was saying something about required owner authorization, but I was suddenly thinking about all the times Colin had told me not to worry yet. All the times he had used that patient voice like a hand between my shoulders, guiding me away from the sharp edge of a thing. All the times I had been grateful. I saw with a kind of cold nausea that my marriage had become the soft access point to my mother's house. The easier I was to soothe, the easier the house was to move. "I haven't signed anything," I said. Denise blinked. "Okay." And I didn't know any of this had gone this far. Her expression changed. Not dramatic, just alert. She pulled the packet back together neatly and slid it toward me. "Then I would hold on to your copies and not let anything move until you're comfortable. Nothing formal can be filed without owner consent." Comfortable. There was a bitter little humor in that word. Comfortable was not the question anymore. "Could I get your card?" I asked. "Of course." She reached into a holder and handed me a plain county card with her name, extension, and email. "If you need clarification on what's been submitted or discussed, call me directly." Clarification. I thanked her somehow. I do not remember exactly how I got back to my car. I only remember sitting behind the wheel with the door shut and the packet in my lap and Denise's card between my fingers like something official enough to keep me from floating away. The parking lot was half full. A city truck idled near the curb. Someone in a fleece vest carried a banker's box into the building. Ordinary afternoon. Ordinary government lot, ordinary sky. I looked down at Mara's initials again. Then I said it out loud to the windshield, to my own face reflected faintly in it. He was asking me not to stop him. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I reached for my phone, found the number. Rachel had once texted me for a locksmith she used after her ex lost a spare key and pressed call. The locksmith came at 4:20, a broad-shouldered man named Kevin with a red beard and a wedding ring dulled by work. He did not ask questions he did not need answers to. He looked at my ID, looked at the deed copy I had pulled from the folder in the hall closet, changed the back lock first, then the front, then handed me 2 new brass keys on a paper tag with the address written across it in black marker. "Want the garage side done too?" he asked. I looked past him at the side yard where the last of the leaves had gathered against the chain link fence and thought of Colin coming in through whatever opening had been easiest for him. "Yes," I said. By the time Kevin left, the house felt different in a way I could not yet trust. Not safe exactly, just no longer open in the same way. I set Denise Hanley's card on the kitchen counter beside the permit packet and the screenshots I had printed at the office copier during the last 10 minutes of my shift. I had printed them because paper made things harder to explain away. A phone screen could be waved off. A stack of pages on a counter looked like a record. Rachel came by just after 5 with a paper bag from Culver's, and the expression she wore when she had already decided not to let me talk myself out of reality. "I brought fries because moral clarity needs salt," she said, then stopped when she saw my face. "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I'm clear." She nodded once, set the food down, and looked around the stripped kitchen. "That's something." I told her about Denise. I told her about the way the woman had said settled and waiting on your signature, like she was describing a plan already moving through ordinary channels. Rachel listened with both hands around her soda cup, her mouth set in that flat line she got when anger had gone too deep to waste itself on performance. "So what's the play?" she asked when I was done. "I'm not doing this in pieces anymore." "Good. He's supposed to come home around 6. He thinks I'm still thinking about whether Thursday works for the contractor." Rachel glanced toward the front window. "Want me here?" I looked at the counter, at the packet, at the little stack of printed messages that had turned my marriage into a file. "No," I said after a second. "Not in the room, but maybe close." She understood immediately. Rachel always had a gift for giving me space without pretending space meant abandonment. "I'll sit in the car for a while," she said. "Or at the diner at the corner if this takes longer. If you text me one word, I come back." I almost smiled. "What word?" "Anything but fine." After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen with the November dark beginning to thicken against the windows. I turned on the small lamp by the old bread box because the overhead light had been flickering for weeks and I could not bear the thought of trying to say any of this under a bulb that buzzed like bad nerves. I took off my wedding ring and set it beside Denise's card. Not dramatically, not as a speech to myself, just because I did not want it on my hand while I touched the papers. At 6:12, I heard Colin's truck in the driveway. My whole body went alert in one clean sweep, but what surprised me was how little confusion was left in it. Fear, yes. Grief already. But not confusion. The back door stayed shut. A second later, his key scraped at the front lock and failed. Then came his footsteps around the side of the house, quick over the damp leaves. He opened the back screen and stopped when the handle would not give. "Lena," he called. I walked over and opened the door myself. He was standing there with a white takeout sack in one hand and the cold on his shoulders. "What the hell?" I changed the locks. For a moment he just looked at me. Then he let out a short laugh that wasn't really laughter. Why, I stepped back and let him in, but only as far as the kitchen. He looked past me, saw the papers on the counter, saw my ring lying there, and I watched the exact second his face reorganized itself into concern. "Okay," he said carefully. "So we're doing this." "We're not doing anything," I said. "I'm doing it now because you wouldn't." He set the takeout bag down beside the sink. "Lena, if this is about Mara, I already explained that." "No," I said. "You explained the version where I stay tired and embarrassed and let you decide what counts as real." His jaw tightened just slightly. "You went through my phone. I opened a message that said once she signs the rest gets easier. And that message was about my mother's house." He exhaled through his nose. "It was about paperwork. It was about me." I picked up the screenshots and slid them toward him. He did not touch them at first. His eyes moved over the pages, over his own words, over hers. "She hears your mother's kitchen and stops thinking structurally. Need her calm first. Don't mention resale yet." The muscles in his face changed, but he still stayed inside that maddening low voice. "You're reading this in the ugliest possible way. How else would you like me to read it?" He spread his hands a little, like two people trying to solve a problem. I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because the smallness of his language had finally become unbearable. "A problem," I repeated. "That's what you called my mother's house to another woman. I called the financial situation a problem. You called me the obstacle. He shook his head. No, I said you were attached. I reached for the permit packet next and laid it open to the page with Mara's initials. She toured the house. She marked up plans. You told me nobody had seen anything yet. That was not a tour. She understands permitting. She was helping. Helping who? He didn't answer quickly enough. The silence there was so clean it almost made the rest unnecessary. I pulled Denise's card from beside the packet and set it on top. I went to the county office. That landed. I saw it. He looked at the card, then at me. Lena. No. Don't start with my name like that. Denise thought my approval was already handled. She said you and Mara had been discussing timelines, filing Windows Office use questions, setback issues. She thought the design side was basically settled. He stared at me, and for the first time all evening he seemed to lose the rhythm of his own defense. She said that, yes. He looked away toward the exposed studs in the wall, toward the place where the old cabinets used to be. I was trying to create options. You were trying to move me one soft conversation at a time until there wasn't enough left of my no to matter. His eyes came back to mine harder now. That's not fair. The sentence slid over me without catching. I had spent too many years stopping at that phrase, turning myself inside out to prove I was fairer than my own hurt. Something in me was simply done. You do not get to ask fairness from me after building a future around my signature before asking for it. He took a step closer to the counter. We are drowning, Lena. This house is bleeding money. I was trying to find a way to make it worth something. It was already worth something. That's not what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. My voice did not rise. That was the part that changed the room. Colin was used to handling tears, hesitation, wounded politeness. He was not used to this version of me, the one not fighting for his understanding, only naming what was true. You kept saying, trust me one last time, I said. You want to know what that means now? It means you knew if I saw the whole thing at once, I'd stop you. So you made sure I never saw the whole thing. You let her walk through my mother's kitchen. You let her write on plans for my house. You spoke about me like I was something to manage until I signed. That's not, it is exactly what it is. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a wronged, reasonable man and more like what he actually was. A person caught in the plainness of his own choices. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said finally. There it was, the coward's refuge. Not innocence, intent. I felt something inside me settle, not because it hurt less, but because it hurt in the shape it had deserved all day. You don't understand yet, I said. The hurt is not the surprise. The hurt is that you needed me calm, more than you needed me included. The hurt is that you stood in this house and asked me for trust while you were already discussing what it would become once I got out of the way. His face shifted at that, just a flicker, but enough. Out of the way. He heard it because it was true. I never said that, he said quietly. No, I said. You just built toward it. The kitchen was silent except for the old refrigerator kicking on again with its tired knock. I thought absurdly of my mother thumping its side and smiling like stubborn things could be coaxed into honesty. Colin rubbed one hand over his mouth. So what now? I looked at the ring on the counter, then at the papers, then at him. Now you take what's yours and go, I said. Not tonight, if you need until morning to get clothes together. I'm not trying to stage a scene. But you are done making decisions about this house. You are done speaking for me at the county office. You are done asking me to trust you with something you were already trying to broker around me. He looked up sharply. You're throwing me out. I'm ending your access. The words came out so clean I almost felt them before I understood them. And once they were spoken, they were the right words. More right than wife, more right than marriage, more right than anything I had called us in months. He stared at me for a long time. I could almost see him searching for the version of me who would soften just to prove she wasn't cruel. I let him look. That woman had kept this house open long enough. At some point during the silence, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Neither of us moved. Finally, he said, My mom's expecting us Sunday. I had not thought about Evelyn all day, and the mention of her brought a fresh ache with it. She had been good to me in the quiet, limited way some women of her generation were good. Never effusive but attentive, always sending leftovers home in proper containers, always asking after my aunt by name. I thought of her folding and unfolding napkins at her condo table. You can tell her whatever version helps you sleep, I said. I'm done carrying it for you. His shoulders dropped, then not in remorse exactly, but in the tired recognition that the script had run out. He took the takeout bag from the counter as if remembering he had come in expecting dinner. The gesture was so ordinary it nearly broke me. At the door he stopped without turning around. I did love you. I believed he believed that. But I also understood finally that belief was not the same thing as protection. You loved me best when I was easy to move, I said. He flinched almost invisibly, then went out into the cold and shut the back door behind him. I stood there for a long time after he left. Long enough for the lamp by the bread box to warm the corner of the room into a softer gold. Long enough for my breathing to stop sounding borrowed. Rachel texted once I wrote back gone. A minute later, I'm outside if you need me. I looked at the screen, then at the kitchen. Not yet, I typed. The house was still half torn apart. The back wall was still raw in places. There were nail holes to fill, trim to finish, questions to answer, money problems waiting in neat, mean little stacks. Nothing about my life had become simple. Nothing about the room had become magically whole. Grief had not reversed itself. Marriage had not survived being named correctly. But the papers on the counter no longer looked like a future. They looked like evidence from a version of my life that had just ended. I gathered the packet, squared the pages, and set the unused renovation plans beside the sink. Then I rested my palm on the worn strip of counter my mother had varnished by hand the summer before she got sick. The wood was cool under my skin, smooth in some places and rough in others where time had lifted the finish. Outside, the last light was thinning through the bare branches over the yard. Inside, the kitchen held the kind of quiet that comes only after something false has finally stopped talking. The room was still bruised, but for the first time in a long while it felt honest.